"Don't come to the ceremony, Dad. I mean it. I don't want you there." He said it the way you'd tell someone to stop chewing with their mouth open. Casual. Annoyed. Like my presence at his college graduation was an inconvenience he'd been dreading for months. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the kitchen of the house I'd owned for 31 years, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold, listening to my son tell me I wasn't welcome at the moment I'd spent $240,000 making possible. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. He looked relieved. That was the part that stayed with me, not the words, not the dismissal, but the relief on his face. Like he'd been carrying a weight and I'd just agreed to keep carrying it for him. He grabbed his keys off the counter and left without saying goodbye. I stood there for a long time after his car pulled out of the driveway. The coffee had gone completely cold. Outside, the oak tree in the front yard was doing what it always did in May, shedding those little helicopter seeds that drift down and stick to everything. I used to rake them up with my son when he was small. He'd throw handfuls of them into the air and watch them spin. He called them whirlybirds. That boy was gone. I wasn't entirely sure when it had happened. "My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I drove long-haul trucks for 27 years. Midwest runs mostly Illinois to Nebraska, sometimes down to Texas, once a month out to the Pacific Northwest. I know what the highway looks like at 3 in the morning when the rest of the country is sleeping. I know what it feels like to eat a gas station sandwich in a parking lot in Amarillo because you're too tired to find a real restaurant and the clock is already running on your next pickup. I know what it means to trade your body for a paycheck, year after year, until your lower back doesn't work right anymore and your knees sound like a bag of gravel when you climb stairs. I did all of that for 2 reasons. The first was my son, Marcus. The second was Marcus's college education. His mother, my wife Carol, passed when Marcus was 11. Pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She made me promise, in those last weeks, that Marcus would go to a good school. "Don't let him end up driving trucks," she said. Not because there was anything wrong with driving trucks, because she knew me, and she knew that a version of Marcus behind a wheel for 30 years was a version of Marcus I had settled for instead of fought for. I kept that promise. I worked longer routes. I took overnight hauls that younger drivers didn't want. I put every extra dollar into a savings account I labeled M College. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy a newer truck. I ate at home when I was home and ate cheap when I wasn't. By the time Marcus was 18, I had enough set aside to send him to the kind of school Carol had in mind. He got into Whitmore University. Business program. Good school. Good reputation. Good connections if you worked it right. I remember driving him to campus his freshman year, the two of us loading his stuff into the elevator of his dormitory and thinking that Carol would have cried. Not the sad kind, the full kind, where you're so proud it actually hurts. 4 years went by. I won't pretend it was all smooth. Marcus changed at school the way a lot of kids change gradually, and then all at once. By his junior year, he had a new group of friends whose fathers were in finance or real estate or law, men who wore the kind of shoes that cost more than my monthly insurance payment. Marcus started calling me less. When I did call him, the conversations had a quality I can only describe as administrative updates exchanged, obligations fulfilled, call ended. I told myself it was just growing pains. I told myself Carol had wanted this for him, a bigger world, and a bigger world sometimes made the old one feel small by comparison. I told myself I wasn't being fair to him. I kept paying the tuition. I kept paying for his apartment off campus junior and senior year. I put money in his account every month, enough for groceries and books and a little breathing room. When he needed a laptop, I bought it. When his car needed a new transmission his sophomore year, I drove 6 hours to help him sort it out and paid the mechanic directly. I told myself that's what fathers do. Then came the Saturday in April, about 6 weeks before his graduation, when he came home for the weekend. I'd made dinner. Nothing fancy, pot roast, the way he used to like it, with the carrots and the potatoes cooked down soft. I'd set the table in the dining room instead of the kitchen because it felt like an occasion. He sat down, looked at the food, and started telling me about the graduation ceremony, who was speaking, where the reception was being held afterward. The restaurant his friends had booked someplace downtown with a prix fixe menu, 4 courses, The kind of place where they don't put prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. Sounds like a real celebration, I said. He cut a piece of the pot roast and put it in his mouth. Chewed. Yeah, it's going to be a big thing. I'll need to know where to be and what time, I said. I was thinking I'd get a hotel room nearby so I don't have to drive back the same night. He set his fork down. The way he did it, gently, carefully, like he was placing it rather than just putting it down, told me what was coming before he said a word. About that, he said. I've been meaning to talk to you. He didn't look at me when he said what he said next. He looked at his plate, at the pot roast and the carrots, at the meal I had spent the afternoon preparing, and he explained to me calmly, patiently, the way you explain something to someone who you expect to be unreasonable about it, that it would probably be better if I didn't come to the ceremony or the reception, that his friends' families were all staying at the Meridian, which was expensive, and he didn't want me to feel out of place, that it was a long drive and my back wasn't great, that there would be a lot of people and it might be a lot to handle. I'm not going to be comfortable, he said, if I'm worried about you the whole time. He made it sound like a kindness. But then I asked him directly, the way my own father had taught me to always ask directly when you suspected you weren't getting the whole truth. I asked him whether it was about my comfort or about his. There was a pause. You'd be out of place there, he said. These are people from a certain background, Dad. You know what I mean. I did know what he meant. He meant that I drove trucks for a living. He meant that I didn't have the right shoes or the right vocabulary for the dinner afterward. He meant that I was going to embarrass him in front of people he was trying to impress. I looked at my son, 22 years old, healthy and whole, sitting at a table in a house I had paid for, eating food I had cooked, getting ready to graduate from a university I had funded to the tune of $240,000, and I understood something I had been avoiding understanding for a long time. He was ashamed of me, not of something I'd done, of what I was. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. We talked about other things. He helped me clear the table, he at least still did that, and then he watched television for a while and went to bed. The next morning he left early, said he had studying to do, and that was the weekend. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after he drove away. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I've heard people describe moments like this as moments of sudden cold anger, like a switch flipping. It wasn't like that for me. It was more like standing outside on a winter night and realizing the house behind you has gone dark, not dramatic. Just the slow recognition that the warmth you'd been counting on wasn't there anymore. I thought about Carol. I thought about the promise I'd made her. I thought about what she had actually meant when she said she wanted Marcus to have a better life. I don't think she meant a life in which he was ashamed of where he came from. I don't think she meant a life in which the man who had worked his spine half to pieces providing for him was someone to be quietly shuffled off to the side. I thought about all of that for several days. And then, on a Tuesday morning, I drove to my bank. I sat down with a woman named Patricia in the financial services office. I had done business with this bank for over 20 years. Patricia knew my name without looking it up. I told her what I needed to do, and she pulled up the accounts, and we took care of it. I canceled the automatic monthly transfer to Marcus's account. I put a stop payment on the check I had already written for the final semester's balance, a check that had been mailed but not yet processed. I moved the remaining money in the college savings account, the portion I had kept as a cushion for incidentals, back into my own savings. Then I called the leasing office for Marcus's apartment and told them I would not be renewing the arrangement at the end of the month, as I had originally indicated. They were sorry to hear that, they said. I thanked Patricia. She didn't ask what had prompted all of this, which I appreciated. I drove home and made lunch. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't send a long letter explaining my reasoning. I didn't post anything on social media or call his grandmother or do any of the things people do when they want to make their grievances the center of attention. I just stopped. I want to address something here, because I've asked myself this question more than once. Was I wrong to do this? Was I being the kind of father who uses money as a weapon? I've thought about it honestly, the way you have to when there's no one around to tell you what you want to hear. There is a difference, I decided, between using money to punish someone and simply stopping the act of funding a life in which you have been told you are an embarrassment. I was not taking something from Marcus that was his. I was declining to continue giving something that was mine. He was 22 years old, not 12. He had a degree, or would have, in 6 weeks. The check for the last semester's tuition would be returned and reprocessed. The university would receive its money eventually. He would graduate. I just would not be paying for the party afterward, or for the apartment, or for any of the other ongoing expenses that I had been covering because I thought I was helping him build a life. What I was actually doing, I realized, was paying for a life that had no room in it for me. That was mine to stop. The weeks before graduation passed quietly. Marcus didn't notice the missing transfer right away. He had money saved, I think, and he was busy with finals. He called me once, about 3 weeks before the ceremony. We had a normal conversation. He told me about a job offer he was considering. I asked questions. He sounded good. He did not say, "I hope you understand about the graduation." He did not apologize. He mentioned the ceremony in passing, once, and I said nothing about it, and we moved on to other subjects. When we hung up, I thought about calling him back. I thought about saying something. I didn't. The graduation was on a Saturday. I know because I had marked it in my calendar months ago, long before that April conversation, when I had still imagined myself sitting in the stands in the afternoon sun with a camera around my neck, watching my son walk across a stage. I spent that Saturday doing things I had been putting off. I fixed a section of the fence in the backyard that had been leaning since last fall. I planted the tomatoes I'd been meaning to get in the ground for 2 weeks. In the evening, I made a simple dinner and watched a ball game and went to bed at a reasonable hour. If there was grief in it, and there was, I let it be what it was. I didn't try to make it smaller than it was, or larger than it was. I had lost something, not all at once, and not on that particular Saturday, but the loss was real, and I sat with it. The following Monday, my phone started ringing. Marcus called in the morning, and I let it go to voicemail. He called again in the afternoon. Then, his girlfriend, a young woman named Brittany, called twice. Then, late in the afternoon, a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Brittany's mother, a woman I had met exactly once, at a dinner the previous Thanksgiving. I listened to the voicemails that evening. Marcus's first message was controlled, measured. He said he needed to talk to me, that there had been some issues with his accounts and his apartment situation, and could I call him back. His second message was less controlled. He said the apartment office had told him the arrangement had been canceled and that he needed to be out by the end of the month, and that the final tuition check had been returned for a stop payment, and that the university was now showing a balance due, and that he was trying to understand what was happening. Brittany's messages were confused and upset. She said Marcus had been counting on things that apparently weren't there, and the dinner they'd planned, the 4-course restaurant downtown, had ended with an uncomfortable moment when Marcus's card had declined on his portion, and she didn't understand what was going on, but she hoped everything was okay. Brittany's mother's message was the most illuminating. Her voice was crisp and not entirely friendly. She said that her daughter had been put in a very uncomfortable position at what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, and that she expected these financial matters to be sorted out promptly, and she looked forward to speaking with me. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said. Probably something sharp, and then something kind, in that order, because that was how she was. I called Marcus back the following morning. He answered on the first ring. "Dad, what's going on?" His voice was tight. "Good morning," I said. "How was graduation?" A pause. "It was fine." "Dad, the apartment." "I canceled the arrangement," I said, "and I put a stop on the tuition check. You'll need to arrange payment with the university directly. They'll work with you on it. They have payment plans." Silence. "Why?" he said, and then stopped, and started again. "Why would you do that?" I had thought about how to answer this question. I had thought about it for weeks. I could have said many things. I could have been cold about it, or angry, or delivered some kind of prepared speech about respect and sacrifice and the weight of what I had given. Instead, I said the truest, simplest version of the thing I had arrived at. "You told me I wasn't welcome at your graduation," I said. "You told me I would embarrass you. I accepted that. I respect that it's your life and your choice. And I made mine." Another silence. Longer this time. "Dad," I didn't. I was just trying to be honest with you. I know, I said. So am I. His voice cracked slightly. The dinner was a disaster. Brittany's parents were there. The card declined. It was humiliating. I thought about the word, humiliating. I let it sit in the silence between us for a moment. I know what humiliating feels like, I said quietly. I know what it feels like to be told that who you are is something to be hidden. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. He didn't say anything. Marcus, I said, I'm not trying to punish you. I want you to understand that. I'm not doing this to make your life hard. I'm doing this because I spent 27 years building something for you. And when you told me I wasn't welcome at the moment that thing was completed, something shifted for me, and I can't unshift it. So what his voice was raw now, the careful control from the beginning of the call stripped away. What happens now? You figure out the apartment. You work out the balance with the university. Call the financial office. They'll help you. The job offer you mentioned. You take it or you don't. But it's time to find out what you can do on your own. I need time to. You have time, I said. You're 22 years old and you have a degree. You have more time and more options than I had when I was your age. You'll be fine, Marcus. I genuinely believe that. I heard him breathe. Heard something shift in that breath, not softening exactly, but something. I'm sorry, he said. About what I said. About telling you not to come. It was a start. It was a real start. And I want to say that honestly, not dismiss it. Not treat it as insufficient. He said it, and I heard it, and it meant something. I know, I said. We talked for a while longer. Not resolved, not mended, those are longer processes, and I've learned to be suspicious of anyone who tells you a broken thing is fixed in a single phone call. But we talked, real talking, the kind where you're not managing each other. He told me he had been caught up in something at school, a version of himself that he wasn't sure he entirely liked in hindsight. I told him I understood more than he might think. We didn't fix everything, but we were both present for the conversation in a way we hadn't been in a long time. Before we hung up, he asked me something. Did you watch anything? During graduation? I don't know. Were you thinking about it? I fixed the fence, I said. The one in the backyard that's been leaning. A long pause. And then, quietly, something that might have been a laugh. That fence has been leaning since I was in middle school, he said. I know, I said. I kept putting it off. The call ended. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard. The fence was standing straight. The tomatoes were in the ground. The oak tree in the front was still dropping its whirlybirds, the way it always did this time of year. I think a lot of people who've been in situations like mine have been told, at one point or another, that they need to ask themselves whether they did enough, whether they gave enough patience, enough chances, enough grace. I've asked myself that. I've sat with it honestly. In the early morning when there's no noise and no distraction and you can't hide from the straightforward truth of your own choices. Here's what I came to. I gave everything I had to give, for a very long time. I gave it willingly, without keeping score, because that is what I understood love to require. But somewhere along the way, the giving had become so automatic, so taken for granted, that it had stopped registering as anything at all. I had become a utility, something that provided and could be counted on to provide, with no more emotional weight than a faucet. The moment I stopped was the moment I became real to him again. That is a painful thing to know about a relationship. It is also useful. Marcus found an apartment with a roommate 2 weeks after graduation. He took the job. He paid the outstanding balance to the university over 3 months. They did work with him on it, as I knew they would. He called me more. Not all the time, and not always comfortably, but more. Last month he drove out on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, which surprised me. I was in the backyard when I heard the car. He came around the side of the house and stood at the fence line, the fixed fence line, and watched me work for a minute without saying anything. Then he came over and picked up the other trowel. We worked in the garden for 2 hours without talking very much. The kind of quiet that isn't awkward, or not entirely. At one point he asked me about the tomatoes, what variety they were, when they'd be ready. I told him. He nodded and kept working. I don't know what the next years look like. I don't know what we're building exactly, or how solid it will be when we're done. I know Carol would have had opinions. She always had opinions. Specific and clear and delivered without apology. One of the things I loved most about her. I think she would have said that I was right to stop. I also think she would have told Marcus, with considerably less patience than I'd managed, exactly what she thought of his behavior at that graduation dinner. But she would have been in the garden too, eventually. Kneeling in the dirt, getting her hands in it, working alongside whoever needed working alongside. That was also who she was. I'm Gerald. I drove trucks for 27 years. My knees sound like gravel on the stairs, and my lower back reports in every morning like a slow-moving complaint. The oak tree in my front yard drops whirlybirds every May, and I have a son who is figuring out slowly, imperfectly, as most of us do, what kind of man he wants to be. I can work with that.